What's going to happen if the election result is contested? NYU professor Richard Pildes is one of America's leading constitutional law scholars. I sat down with him earlier this week.
Well, of course, it's going to depend on how close the margins are in individual states and how close the margins are overall. But if the margins are as close as the polls are suggesting, then I suspect we will have, tremendous court battles after the election, sort of knife fights over every absentee ballot and the like, if the margins actually could turn on those fights.
How concerned are you about that prospect?
Well, I'm not concerned about going to court and having courts adjudicate any possible disputes. I'm more concerned, of course, about efforts to destabilize the process, to undermine the legitimacy of the process, even to stop the vote counting process. So as we know from 2020, if the key states can't be resolved for a number of days after Election Day, which is certainly possible, I think with so many people primed already to believe something suspicious is going on, I think that could be a dangerous period of time. And I do worry in that period, I'm talking the first several days or week after the election, I do worry about possible unrest, efforts to interrupt the vote counting process. I think we will get through all of this, but those are the immediate concerns I have.
Donald Trump has been asked repeatedly if he will accept the election result, and he refuses to give an all-encompassing commitment. What do you make of that?
Well, I think we've learned already from 2020 that he won't concede defeat, even if he has, in fact, lawfully been defeated. I think the system this time around is much more prepared in a variety of ways for challenges to the integrity of the process. I think in 2020, many of the actors in the system were sort of caught by surprise. I also think we've had a lot of our battles fought out in advance of the election in court. So many of the issues, the legal issues about voting policy, have already been litigated. Last time around, there was an effort by the Trump campaign to raise legal issues after the election that couldn't have been addressed after the election because, of course, it's too late once votes have already been cast. And there's also been major reforms to the statute that regulates the relationship between the states and Congress in the voting process, and also regulates what happens in the states in the election process. And this is called the Electoral Count Reform Act. And I think that hardens up the system also and provides more security for the process.
What legal avenues do you think Donald Trump would be likely to pursue if he is to contest the election result?
Well, there are different things you might mean by contesting the result. So if the result is extremely close, I can imagine either side going to court, depending on whether they think a court victory would actually give them a win in a particular state and affect the overall outcome of the election. And there's nothing wrong with litigation after the election to raise questions about the process, as long as there's an appropriate, factual and legal foundation for those challenges. That is how we work out disputes that might legitimately arise. But there are other ways of challenging the results or really trying to undermine the results that are not within the bounds of law. And there are a number of those that people worry about in advance, ranging from the local level. So one of the things that's hard for people to understand or make sense of about our election system is that it's unbelievably decentralized, even for national elections. We have over 10,000 jurisdictions that actually administer our elections. So there are worries at the local level that some of the local officials may not be willing to do their legal duty. There are worries about whether the state legislatures might try to insert themselves into the process. There are worries about what Congress might do on January 6th, 2025, when it receives the electoral votes. There are points of vulnerability in this very decentralized system that people worry about being potentially exploited for partisan, self-seeking purposes, not for legitimate, lawful purposes. I think there are lots of securities and guardrails in place for all of that, but we might see some of this kind of activity going on. And some of this would be, as I say, not within the bounds of appropriate legal challenges to the process or the vote counting process.
What might be the role of a partisan Supreme Court in this equation?
Well, I think it's very unlikely the Supreme Court would end up getting involved in the election, whatever you think about the court. And obviously there are people in the U.S. who view the court in more partisan terms. There are other people who don't share that view. But the last thing the Supreme Court wants is to be involved in the middle of the presidential election, because it understands that whichever side it comes down on, the other side is almost certainly going to believe, rightly or wrongly, that the decision was based on partisan factors and not the law. But it's not very common in our history, of course, that the court has gotten involved after the election. There was the 2000 election, but that's really the only time. As you know, in 2020, the Trump campaign did try to get the Supreme Court involved. The Supreme Court refused to get involved. So I think it's unlikely that the Supreme Court will end up in the middle of the election after the votes have been cast.
As you mentioned, it's highly likely that some states are going to be delayed in finalising their results. What states do you think are most likely to be slow?
Yes, so the states that I think are most likely to be slow in getting to account are Pennsylvania, which of course many people view as the most important state in the election. Also Wisconsin, which is viewed as a critical state in advance. I think Arizona might be slow in being able to get results. There are particular policy choices legislatures have made in those states that account for why the vote counting process is going to go slowly. So many of our voters now vote by absentee ballot. And in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin in particular, their election officials basically have to ignore those ballots, can't do anything with those ballots until Election Day. And it takes a significant amount of time to process those ballots. They come in envelopes. In Pennsylvania, there are actually 2 envelopes. There may be something like 1.8 million absentee votes cast in Pennsylvania. And when you start adding it all up, this is a lot of paper to deal with. And if you can't start working through the process until Election Day, it's inevitable that it's going to take a significant amount of time past election night to count all of those votes. So particularly because those states are viewed as very critical states, if the election is close, I think that opens the door to a lengthy process in getting to a resolution of who is the winner of 270 electoral votes and therefore going to be elected president.
And how might a lengthy process threaten the integrity of the election in the eyes of some voters?
So I should say, there's nothing wrong, of course, with the process taking the appropriate amount of time it takes to come to an accurate count. That's what we want. We want the election administrators to do a good job of getting to an accurate count. But I think, especially after 2020, voters who are disappointed by seeing the count starting to run against their candidate, on the second day or the third day and the like, I think we are in a culture of pervasive distrust of institutions, including the institutions that administer our elections. And we're not alone with this institutional distrust, but it's really pervasive about our election administrative process right now. And so I think the longer it takes to get to an accurate account, even though nothing nefarious is going on, in a social media fueled culture of conspiracy theorizing, rumor mongering, distrust, and the like, I think that's a potentially dangerous situation. And I think this time around, it's probably more explosive even than in 2020, because many people are primed now to believe there's something perhaps nefarious going on. So, certainly the sooner we can get to an accurate count and have a clear and decisive winner, the better for all of these kinds of concerns.
When you reflect on what happened in 2020, how significant was Mike Pence's role in certifying the election?
Well, of course, he had no discretion to act otherwise. He understood that. The system is not designed so that the vice president can somehow, thwart the will of tens of millions of American voters. His role before Congress in that joint session on January 6th is a kind of purely formal or ceremonial role. He deserves a lot of credit for understanding that. I don't think he ever seemed to have wavered in that understanding. One of the things that Congress did after 2020 is it passed this new statute called the Electoral Count Reform Act, which makes it very clear that the vice president's role is only this sort of ministerial role. So he doesn't certify the result. He just opens the votes from the states and passes them on to Congress, which then counts those votes.
To what extent does the system rely on individuals doing the right and proper thing?
Yes, so to put the larger framework together on how our elections are structured, they are both highly decentralized, and we have many partisan actors we elect to administer the system. So unlike many other democracies, which have sort of independent election administrative institutions and often have national processes and national bodies for their national elections, we don't have any of that. And so this comes out of the sort of particular sort of sense of democratic popular sovereignty that's in the DNA of the United States. And it goes back in many ways to the Jacksonian era of American democracy in the 1830s when a lot of this was set up. And as a result, we do have partisan actors who are in key roles in administering our election system. For example, the highest election officers in the states are typically secretaries of state. They're elected, typically, they're elected on partisan tickets often. So that's part of the kind of unusual structure we have, highly decentralized with a lot of partisan elected officials overseeing and administering the system.
What do you make of the role and the influence of money in US politics?
Well, that's a hard question to answer. I think there have been complaints about money in politics ever since we've had elections, or various forms of trying to influence the process. In a strange way, right now, although there's a tremendous amount of money in the system and a tremendous amount given by a relatively small number of individuals, billionaires who are now able to give tens of millions of dollars to organizations that support particular candidates. We actually are in a place where the two parties are more closely in equipoise about that. So in a strange sense, the role of money has been somewhat equalized, even though, of course, it's equalized through people who have the resources to provide a lot of money. But I should say...
They cancel each other out, is what you're saying.
To an extent, and also with the rise of social media and the internet, one of the major developments in financing of our elections has been the role that small donors now play in the election process. So many more people actually donate to candidates now than in the past, even if they only donate $25. And so there's more participation, if you will, in the financing system, in the sense that many more people are able to give even small amounts. And that stuff adds up to very significant resources, in addition to the money that the very wealthy are able to put into the system.
When you think about the system as a whole, what would you say is the greatest vulnerability heading into next week?
I think that we're going to see at the local level some officials who refuse to do what they are legally required to do, which is to simply kind of tabulate and certify the vote in their county and then send those numbers up to the next level, to the state. I think we're going to have some county actors, local actors, who are going to say, I think there was something wrong in this process. I think there was fraud. This is not really their role, and they will maybe have their own suspicions, but they won't actually have a factual basis for this. The way to deal with these issues, claims about irregularities or potential fraud and the like, is through the court system. But I think we will have some local officials who say, I'm not going to certify this result. I think that will get taken care of by the courts. I think it'll get taken care of fairly quickly. I do expect some of that to happen. I worry some about state legislatures trying to get involved in the process. There are various legal constraints about that, but that's not to say they won't try to do various things. All this depends on how close the outcome is. So, I can guarantee you that, if the outcome turns on one or two states and the vote in those states seems fairly close, we will be in for a period of prolonged litigation and battles about the accurate results in those couple of states.
Steel yourself, in other words.
Maybe. I mean, this is just one possible route. Of course, if the more decisive the outcome is, the less likely any of these scenarios are to arise.